Okay. Well, it's such a pleasure to see some faces, actually see people. And thank you so much for joining us tonight. You're in for a real treat. Um, wow, it's been 10 months, 10 months of confusion and just not knowing exactly what was taking place. And back in March, the Historical Society did start to discuss, well, how do we capture what's happening? Yes, we can collect newspapers, et cetera, but how do we really connect and collect the personal stories of people going through the pandemic, going through quarantine, going through isolation? How do we do that without being intrusive? So our answer was, well, it's our mission to collect. We must document what's happening for future generations. So we asked you, and we asked you in your own time and in your own way, if you would share your story with us. The responses came back to us via email, phone calls, conversations at the post office, notes, handwritten notes to us, and of course, a video project that we conducted with several of the businesses on the island. The responses included anxiety, sadness. There was a cathartic response from several people, a lot of creativity, and there were some silver linings. Jacquelyn Ottman and Kiaer came up with I'll call it a nourishing path to get them through their quarantine. And they've documented their time in their latest book, Connection from a Quarantine Kitchen, which is obviously for sale in the Haven store. And we'll get to that later. But tonight, with Charity Robey's help as moderator, Charity, of course, being the culinary expert, we're going to hear directly from Jackie and Karen about their experience, about their book. And I do think we'll end this program feeling a bit hungry. And hope that you enjoy this. And we look forward to hearing your story as well. And perhaps this will inspire you to contact us and let us know how you're doing. And on that note, I would like to turn it over to Charity and Jackie and Karen. And thank you for being here.
Thanks, Nanette.
Thank you, Nanette.
So as Nanette's just outlined so well, this year, life on Shelter Island changed in ways that we're still processing. We know that it's historical, but that people will take note of it, but we don't really have perspective on it yet. But that is why it's so important that the Historical Society took the initiative to gather documents, and that's why Jackie and Karen's story is so interesting and so pertinent. But it's also interesting because this was not the first time that people who call Shelter Island home have experienced upheaval, sometimes of historical proportions. And one of the great things about the Shelter Island Historical Society is how they help us remember that. I would like to read you just a couple of lines from some letters that were written to and by some Shelter Islanders in 1779. And at that time, war and occupation by the British had ruined the livelihoods of these citizens of Shelter Island, had turned them into refugees. Things were very, very bad. And we have firsthand accounts of that because of the work of the Historical Society, and also in the case of these two particular letters, the work of Pat Schillenberg and a group of volunteers. I think maybe one or two of those volunteers are here tonight, and these volunteers working with Pat Schillenberg transcribed the Deering letters, a huge compendium of letters to and from members of the Deering family over a long period of time. And these two particular letters are letters that were transcribed. I think Joanne Sherman might be here. Joanne, I think you were one of the transcribers. And it gives us a wonderful look into the lives of these folks. So here's one of the letters. This was from Elizabeth Davenport. She wrote it to Thomas Deering on January 16th, 1779. She wrote to him, "I am tired out in our unsettled posture. We have had 2 removes within the 8 months. No cow. The cry for grain is very great amongst us. I fear for the others, but especially for Long Island friends." This is during the occupation of the British, when things were bad. There was a war going on the land here. This letter is from Sylvester, a second letter from Sylvester Deering. This was on June 3rd, 1779, same year, later in the year. And he was writing of his safe return from the island, from Shelter Island, where he tarried 7 days very peaceable. He was a refugee from the island. So he had come to the island to visit his property. He stayed 7 days, and he said, "I found our house not much damaged by the troops this winter, but got very little of anything from there. The man who is in our house has got a little grain on the ground this season, and I'm in hopes if the enemy keep from the east, then I shall be able to get something off it in the fall." So I just think that it's interesting and important to link our current situation. These are links to our past. And I think that it's interesting that the centrality of food to our emotional and physical well-being is something that just can't be understated. And that is what we're here to talk about tonight. So I'll start by just sort of asking Jackie and Karen a couple of questions. And I guess the first one I'll sort of direct to Jackie. Jackie, what made you want to cook? Why was that your reaction?
Yeah, great question. Actually, there's 2 answers to that. One of them is about cooking as a creative outlet, and the other is more practical, related to some research that I was doing on a book that I happened to be writing, of all things, on leftovers. So Karen and I each live in the city, and when we're here, we love to cook, and whether it's her apartment or mine, and we love to go to museums and galleries. And of course, when Karen asked me out to Shelter Island, when we all, half of New York seemed to be escaping in mid-March, we couldn't go to the galleries and the museums. So we went to the kitchen and we started to cook. And that really provided some really nice continuity from, normal times. And it also gave us an opportunity to express ourselves creatively and have some fun. So Karen's an artist, and she would be plating all her pancakes and eggs with the nasturtiums and different things. And when I would finish making dinner and say, "Karen, let's, serve dinner," she'd descend on the kitchen with the parsley and what have you. And we would be making these beautiful creations. And they were so beautiful. They were like artwork. So it prompted us to take these pictures. So that's how all the pictures started in the book. It really didn't start as a book. Now, the second thing was very practical. As I mentioned, I was researching about leftovers, and it was just as time again would have it. I had just finished a 10-week course at the Institute of Culinary Education here in New York on cooking techniques. And I went in search of tips and tricks for repurposing leftovers, and I found some. So when I got out to Shelter Island on March 17, I was raring to go to put some of these tips and tricks to work and figure out how to really use her kitchen as a laboratory for my leftover research. And that was another reason for the pictures, is because I was trying to document what I was doing in real time so I could extract lessons later on when writing the book. So here's a picture for everybody called Picture Perfect Leftovers. And that's was literally a typical lunch served on really pretty china that Karen happened to have. And there was that's leftover meatloaf, everybody, just on a piece of toast with some gravy and some parsley and just served on a pretty table.
That's great.
I might add, Charity, just so everybody knows, once I raised my 3 sons and they were out of the house, I lost all interest in cooking. So to have 3 meals a day served to me, I don't think that happened since I was a child. So I was the beneficiary of all this cooking.
And she got to do the easy stuff of the plating while I did the heavier lifting in the kitchen. It was just fun. We just had fun. It was this continuity from, nice times we'd spend in New York in our respective kitchens cooking.
So, Jackie, I think you have, because of your background, a tendency to look at cooking and eating through the lens of avoiding food waste and using leftovers. And you've already spoken to this. But what did you learn about leftovers as you entered this pandemic cooking?
Oh, so much. We could spend the entire time on that. And I'm writing a book about it. But one key thing is the ability to plan for the week. If we can all just plan for, let's say, the next 7 days and not have to worry about, the last minute dinner invite on Wednesday that just throws the whole plan into havoc, we could really start cascading food from one meal to a next and, carry food forward much easily. In fact, we barely, not only did we not throw any food away in the trash, but we hardly had anything for the compost heap either, because we were just so efficient, because we could do that planning and inventory control. The other thing is, and I wrote about this in an article in the Shelter Island Reporter that appeared on May 4th, because I was kind of keeping track of my lessons and trying to share them with the world as fast as I could, is how versatile food is. So, the most versatile food I think out there is eggs. You can literally eat eggs for wonderful meals, 3 meals a day. It's nothing like, eating cornflakes or something. Eggs, you can go all meals of the day. And we have a picture, if Rachel will put it up, of these sweet potato toasts. So I had just learned about these sweet potato toasts. Everybody know about sweet potato toast? You basically
tell me.
They
look good.
We had one silly sweet potato left over, and I learned that you just plank them, and so that's just one potato on this platter, and then you just you see the tomato and a little avocado or a little cheese, whatever you have, savory or sweet. And you put them on the toast and you put them in a sheet pan in the oven for like 350 for 10 minutes. And you have this absolutely delicious, this was lunch one day.
Jackie, you said plank. Do you mean you sliced it?
You sliced it. There's still only one potato that's been sliced from side to side.
Oh, so you sliced it thin. You
sliced it thin.
Okay.
And then it's called sweet potato toast. I learned about it in my class at ICE.
And you leave the skin on.
You leave the skin on. And then
so it holds together.
You can do savory, you can do sweet, you could do peanut butter, you just go Google sweet potato toast. There's no recipes in the book. I just Googled whatever I had around and found ideas. And so I Googled sweet potato toast, and that's what came up.
That's great. They look delicious. So, all right, now you have to tell the Spanakopita story. Okay. Am I pronouncing that correctly?
Yes, please. So if we could, Rachel, show the picture of the Spanakopita, because this is a 3-part story, as you can see here. And I basically had literally a handful of creamed spinach that was left over from the night before. And I also had another handful of pastry dough. I buy that puff pastry from Swanson and available in the freezer case at the store, and no rolling pin. So you can see here in the afternoon, I'm rolling out the dough with a big bottle of water. Okay. And then I had enough for 5 Spanakopita. Okay. And so here I am at the end, after they've come out of the oven. I probably showered and now I'm dressed for dinner. And there I am with the 5 Spanakopita. So that was just a lovely hors d'oeuvre. It was one of my favorites at my wedding 12 years ago. And here it is, still in my brain. And we made it out of the cream spinach and a little bit of feta cheese. By the way, everybody, keep feta cheese in the fridge. It's packed in brine. It hardly, will never it just lasts such a long time, and you can just drop feta cheese in everything to give it a lift. And that's what's in these Spanakopita.
They look delicious. So that was an appetizer. So you weren't just doing 3 meals a day. You were doing appetizers too.
Well, yeah, that was just that was a little appetizer before dinner one night. Yeah, we really didn't do appetizers every night. It was just something special since I had that handful of creamed spinach left.
So let me ask you. It sounds like you were, obviously you all were doing this together. But Karen said something a minute ago about she hadn't eaten that well since she was a kid. And was there something about doing this under these extreme conditions that inspired you to make maybe go for more, go bigger than you would ordinarily?
Well, this is pretty much how we eat when we get together in the city. It's an occasion, it's an activity. So we were basically continuing that, but also, we were stuck in the house like everybody else. So this was a form of, and as I said, no museums, no galleries to go to. So this was really a creative outlet, a source of fun. Especially when we first got out there was so much fear. And there were those nightly newscasts with de Blasio and Cuomo and the president and the whole gang at the White House and what have you, and the newspapers. And it was just so oppressive that getting into the kitchen was just a way to tune it all out and to focus on something that was fun, creative, positive, gave us a sense of accomplishment and a creative outlet.
And I don't know about Jackie, but I didn't gain any weight.
No, I didn't gain weight either. And we didn't get sick. I mean, we just ate 3 really satisfying, pretty meals served on, on a pretty table and pretty china, and got through.
Yeah. So Karen, this is kind of a question for you coming out of that. So, our grandparents, and for some of us, our parents, lived through times of scarcity and rationing. But did you see the cooking that you and Jackie were doing together, or the cooking and the eating, the way that you were doing these meals? Was this part of that historical continuum of American cooking? Were you thinking at all about how Americans in previous crises were, how similar or not similar what you were doing was to what they did?
Yes, Charity. I'm always channeling my ancestors that came in the early 1600s, particularly about food. During the American Revolution, you mentioned before, Long Island and Shelter Island were occupied by the British. And the British, took all the good food and the cows and the hogs and the hay and the everything. So during that time, the Shelter Islanders really had to make do with, and be very creative. And when I think back about my ancestors, particularly in the 16 and 1700s, particularly the women, they cooked out of huge 40 to 50 pound cast iron pots. And if we just think about that today, if you remember those on the Zoom tonight during the Hurricane Bob in 1991, when we had no electricity, I had no electricity for 10 days and I had to feed 3 large hungry boys. And without electricity, I pulled out my Weber grill and I really channeled my ancestors, because I got out my old cast iron pots and pans and we cooked on that grill for 10 days. And we cooked a lot of things that my ancestors cooked 400 years ago. Yams, sweet potatoes, white potatoes, of course, fish, because, we have that all around Shelter Island, corn, naturally. So a lot of the foods that we enjoy today, our ancestors ate and cooked, 300-400 years ago. You getting hungry?
Yes, they did. You're reminding me of when my oven flamed out early in the pandemic, and I had a loaf of bread proofing, and I had to cook it on my Weber grill.
Oh no!
I don't recommend that. Was it? Jackie, you mentioned a minute ago that it was, we all felt, I think, some trepidation about going to the grocery store, about, shopping. I mean, we weren't supposed to go out at all if we could avoid it, but where, did that make it hard to find the kinds of foods that you wanted to cook, and where did you go?
Actually, it was pretty easy finding the basics and a little more at the IGA. I'm not a gourmet cook. I'm just a home cook who still hews to recipes and things. And one of the recipe collections that I really relied on was this insert from the New York Times that I just happened to throw in my bag as I was running out the door in March. And it's called One Pan, One Pot, One Skillet from the New York Times. And these are pretty, basic recipes, maybe 3 or 4 ingredients. So my hat's off to the IGA, because we could find most of the things that we were looking for at the IGA, or we could find substitutes. So if they didn't have chicken breasts, they might have chicken tenders. And then we had to kind of go home and figure out, well, what do we do with these things? But it was all pretty interchangeable, I'd have to say. We also went down to Commander Cody's for fish, and it was just wonderful how they kept plugging away, only one person in the store at a time, but they always had inventory, and they were always so gracious, even though it was all so fearful. And then I had left at the end of May, and then Karen was there, of course, through the summer and now into the fall. You want to talk about what happened in the summer?
Yeah, no, we had then, of course, the market at the Havens House. And I have a garden. I've had a garden for the 50 years I've been on the island. And then all the vegetables from our terrific farmers on the North and South Fork. So we certainly had access to fabulous fresh vegetables.
Yeah. Yeah, there was also, even when the Havens House Market started up, that was, it was a huge, big deal on Shelter Island, obviously. Not only because we all had access to, beautiful produce that was local, but also because it was one of the few places where you could safely sort of socialize outside. And, you could go there and you could see people. You might not want to get too close to them, but you could see them. And it was, everybody had to stand in lines and whatnot, but we were outdoors, and it was a really important, I think, for a lot of people. There were a lot of people there, the turnout was good. And it was a very important institution. And it also, I think, from a historical standpoint, it was interesting to think about how a lot of people on the island were not eating in restaurants. They were eating at home, and they were eating locally produced food, much more in line with what our ancestors would have done. So it was kind of a throwback, but it was great. It was great.
Sure. I remember one day early on, one of Karen's friends left off a carton on the front steps. I guess that's kind of a Shelter Island thing to do, is leave the food on the steps, of 12 tiny eggs. And I had never cooked with tiny eggs before. And I had learned that you're supposed to put a raw egg in ramen noodles. And I put one of these tiny eggs in each of our ramen noodles, and it just turned it into this whole Korean feast.
Were they quail eggs? Or
yes, real tiny eggs.
They were quail, or they were chicken eggs?
Yes, they were chicken eggs from, I think, Andrew Ward's father's chickens.
Oh.
It was such a treat. They
wow.
were precious little tiny eggs that we put in the ramen noodles and have a feast.
That's a great idea. That's wonderful.
Yeah,
that's great. So, one of the things that you talk about in the book a little bit is how Shelter Island, as a physical sort of or geographical location, influenced your experience of the pandemic. Could you talk a little bit more about that, Jacquelyn?
Sure. So one thing that was really important and just stunning was the nature. I have been coming to Shelter Island literally since I was 4 years old, but only in the summertime. So here was a chance to watch the spring come in. And here was a chance to plant the snap peas in Karen's garden and literally watch them grow. So, and I was just so taken by it all. We started taking pictures of the nature in Shelter Island. And so what you see on the screen here is a sequence, 1, 2, 3, 4 in the little pictures, and then 5 is the day I left, of how the snap peas grew so quickly. I never got to eat the snap peas because when I left on May 21st, they weren't just blooming yet.
So I ate them all.
So Karen ate all the snap peas, but I got to take their picture and watch them come in. So we also, when we first got there, just to stay fit, we walked on the beaches, and we chose a different beach each day, and it was just fabulous in March with the wind on our faces. And then there was another whole aspect of it, which was the sense of community there. I mean, we're all in community now on this Zoom call through the Shelter Island Historical Society, who I should have thanked Nanette and Rachel, et cetera, and all for bringing us together tonight. But also there was this wonderful sense of community that was led by the library. So whether it was the Friday night dialogue, the trivia game at 5 o'clock on Saturdays, the great conversations, there was this wonderful community, and some of the same faces in the, the Hollywood Squares boxes and things. But it was just, the island was beautiful. It felt safe. It really felt like we were all pulling together to keep ourselves and everyone else safe. So when I saw the call by the Shelter Island Historical Society for our story, I was really compelled, like, oh, I've got to donate something here to them, because we have a story to tell, and this would be really being part of that community. I'd feel part of that community. And then also, when I came up with the version of the book that's now on Amazon, there was a larger Shutterfly version for the Historical Society. Then I created one for Amazon. I felt really compelled to dedicate that to the people of Shelter Island. It's a thank you for letting me shelter in place on such a nice place.
That's great. Thank you.
Sure.
So you were not only sort of innovative in coming up with amazing things to do with leftovers, but when Easter rolled around, tell everybody how this happened.
Well, these are obviously 3 eggs, and we didn't have those coloring kits, from Paws in the supermarket. So I went online, and I knew about natural dyes, actually, from a science project my middle sister had done in 8th grade, her 8th grade. And so I found natural dyes, turmeric, and I had turmeric on the shelf, and I had just enough turmeric to color 3 Easter eggs. And we found this beautiful blue bowl in Karen's pantry, and there we were with 3 yellow eggs in a blue bowl. And what could be more perfect for Easter?
They are really beautiful.
Aren't they pretty? Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was really the same process of putting the vinegar in the hot water with the Paws. It was the same thing, and you just soak it overnight.
Except turmeric's probably a lot better for you than whatever that dye is. You could eat the shells.
Right. Now, here's something too, is if you look in the book, you'll see the Easter eggs on the table on Sunday morning. And then on Wednesday, it is no coincidence that we ate egg salad for lunch. And in fact, those are the egg salad sandwiches, Charity, you found in the book that were so pretty. In fact, maybe Rachel can show the egg salad sandwiches, or those are the grilled.
I don't know if we had a slide made of the egg salad sandwich. Were they super yellow?
Yeah, they were, but actually, I'm getting confused. They were
so some of the turmeric, I think we had a grilled cheese sandwich,
That's
but
right.
it was also beautiful.
They were just as pretty, and lots of parsley.
Yes,
and carrot.
Yes.
Yeah.
So the turmeric does it actually dye the inside of the egg too?
No, it was just the outside.
Just the shell. Okay,
The
all right.
shell. Yeah.
They are gorgeous. I mean, they're golden, they're really beautiful.
Maybe we'll start something here.
Yeah, I'm going to try that for sure.
Yeah.
All right. So into every kitchen, bloopers must come. And so, you know that I'm going to ask you this question, which is something that you didn't expect must have happened at some point. At some point, I know you didn't try to make a souffle, so the souffle didn't fall, but come on, give us something. Did anything unexpected happen?
Accidents outside of just me always cutting my fingers and burning my wrist.
Oh no.
I'm just totally accident prone personally, but we did have one fabulous, happy kind of an accident. If Rachel will show the picture of the happy pancakes. So again, I'm this food waste freak, and I'm always working the sides of bowls with spatulas and turning over the olive oil to make sure every drop drips into the pan and what have you. So one morning, Karen was making pancakes, and I noticed that she was just about to throw into the sink the bowl with the batter. And I'm like, you're not going to put that in the sink, are you? And I found a spatula and I scraped all around the bowl, and we had just enough for one additional pancake. And so just fun. The girls having fun in the kitchen again. I decorated this pancake with the blueberries and the strawberry, and that was our happy face pancake that's also in the book.
It's a very large bacon mouth. Well, it looks delicious.
It was, and we just found it just by personifying this. It's like, oh my goodness, our little happy face guy might have gone down the drain if we didn't rescue him from the side of the bowl. It was just fun, just fun.
Yeah. Well, so I'm, and maybe this is an answer to this question, but were there things that you learned during this period of quarantine cooking that you will take with you, that you think will endure as maybe new practices or just ways of cooking and eating that are going to become part of your new normal?
I'll jump in here. I would focus on the whole sense of community. I saw a lot of the fathers that were working from home all of a sudden learned how to cook. And I saw grandparents and talked to grandparents who were teaching the grandchildren cooking, and parents whose college kids were home and quarantining. So I think it was a very historic time where a lot of families were together, generationally speaking. Even my son in Boston and my two grandchildren, my son had to work from home, and he learned how to cook during the pandemic because he said that it was probably the two best months of his life where he got to be home every day with his children. I mean, there's a very positive spin on the pandemic, particularly for fathers or mothers, either one that, were in an office most of the time. And now we're home in the kitchen with their children and grandchildren.
Yeah, I was also tracking the words pandemic cooking and leftovers through my Google alerts throughout the whole time. And I learned that all around the world, people were not only getting smarter about leftover and food waste, they were getting more sophisticated too. So while a lot of people still wanted to order takeout, they figured out intuitively the concept of intentional leftovers, where they would order a double order so they would have extra food for later in the week. So I hope the image of leftovers has turned for a lot of people, and from a negative into a positive, and they realized how convenient it can be to make a little extra or order a little extra. Also, if you look at this whole leftovers thing from the 50,000, foot view, I hate to say it, but climate change just might be worse in the future than the pandemic. And the whole leftover thing relates to food waste. It relates to alleviating hunger, and it relates to climate change. So absolutely, I'm really hopeful that a lot of those connections are being made, or at least the seeds being planted, so that we can shepherd our food resources much more wisely, even when things get back to normal.
Mm-hmm. So, Jackie, I think you need to come up with a new word for leftovers, though. We have to rebrand them. The name is so sad, especially when they are intentional. And I think a lot about, for instance, I'm a big sourdough bread baker, and I know a lot of people are into that. And that's a type of bread that's actually better left over than it is immediately after it's baked.
Right. Well, it's really interesting because this is what I'm going to be incorporating into my book. Everybody loves fried rice, but no one really realizes that that fried rice is how the Chinese use leftover rice. You cannot make fried rice from fresh steamed rice. Mm-hmm. And many leftovers, like the ones, you think I'm plugging this thing for the Times, but a lot of these one pan, one pot, one skillet meals actually taste better the second or even the third day, because the flavors developed and matured and everything all mixed and matched so beautifully.
And Charity, you probably know this, but leftover sour bread makes the most delicious French toast.
Yes.
There's the breakfast lady talking. Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
So let's hear it for leftovers.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
So, well, I understand that you're going to be offering copies of your book to culinary history libraries and food study programs. And of course, this book came out of a request for documents from the Shelter Island Historical Center. So obviously this is much more than just a diary of what you ate. Why was it important? We've talked so far about why the experience of doing this was important, but why was it important to document it?
Sure, sure. Well, I'm an archivist. It's something in the DNA. I've kept a diary every night since age 10. I'm the family's archivist. I even created a compilation of 5 generations of my family's recipes. So somehow I just took to taking these pictures and then really responding when the Shelter Island Historical Society put out a call for stories. And then I started to see that food studies programs like NYU Steinhardt School has a food studies program. They put out a call for pandemic cooking stories. And so I could see that this was historic and that maybe our story, if we could pull it all together, could make a contribution. And it's part of, you know, leaving a legacy too, because I feel like, you know, in the future, culinary historians or historians are going to want to know what we all in this crazy year called 2020 ate and did during this horrific pandemic. So I just wanted to make a contribution that way. And it was a natural thing to do.
That's great. That's great. Well, we're glad you did.
Oh,
So I see that there are some questions that have come up, and I'm gonna ask you guys to field a couple of them. Are you ready?
sure.
All right, let's see. I'm not sure. Maybe you addressed this question already, but I'm going to ask it anyway. This is from Cecile Sutter. Cecile, are you here? If you want to ask it yourself, you can unmute. And
Hi. Super. I just was asking why they weren't fat, but they kind of addressed it. Thank you.
Did you really address it? Because I think it's you know, it's actually an interesting.
Yeah, we can.
It's not just
elaborate
taking walks. In other words, you know.
No, we ate 3 solid meals a day, and they were very
Healthy.
satisfying. We didn't snack. I mean, I have one picture of Karen in the book eating some ice cream, like out of the carton one night or something. But we barely even ate desserts. And if we ate desserts, it was again a leftovery kind of resilient thing where I would bake an apple or slice some bananas and put them in a pan and just try to do something special with fruit. So we ate well and we ate healthy, and we just didn't feel like snacking.
No snacking.
Mm-hmm.
No snacking.
Yeah. I think it's also, I mean, I don't, you had said that you used to eat in restaurants, right? I mean, that was, you know, I mean, not maybe all the time, but I think that when you start cooking at home more, you see that there's something going on in most restaurant meals that's a lot more fattening than what's going on in home cooking.
It's called butter and sugar.
Yeah, no, that's a really, really good point. Is we ate healthy, and it's like kept making stock, and we would make pasta or soup from our stock. So that was much healthier than just putting in water, you know, to cook with the stock so actively. So things where we packed in the nutrition, but not the calories.
Mm-hmm.
That's a good way to summarize
Certainly,
it.
Thank
one
you.
of the things I learned watching Jackie cook was you can cook pasta and have it with stock as opposed to lovely heavy cream and lots of butter.
Because the flavor is on the inside of the pasta,
right.
not glommed on top with butter and cheese.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great. Okay, so we have a question. Oh, Christine. So Christine, do you want to unmute and ask your question about pandemic shopping habits?
Sure, and I'm sorry I'm not on video, but I'm having my dinner and nobody wants to see that. They may have already answered this. I was just curious about the pandemic shopping habits and whether you shopped for recipes or generally bought staples and got creative from there. And it sounds like you did use recipes sometimes, but maybe depending on the supply, you also often just bought staples and then worked on how to put it together later.
Right, that's a great question, Christine. Christine is with the Culinary Historians of New York. We planned the meals around the week. So we planned for, let's say, 3 key recipes, and then we just knew we would be having intentional leftovers, and we would be repeating some things and repurposing other things. I have to say we kept a very, for us, a well-stocked pantry. So we had some dry soups, we had different cheeses, a couple of different kinds of bread, so that we could improvise with what was in the pantry. And we shopped with a list, and I kept a very, Karen would think I was silly, but I kept a very strict inventory of what we had in the fridge, the freezer, and the pantry. So when we shopped, we knew what we had and we could just buy what we needed.
And I wish I had known about Charity sourdough bread, because I would have been at your doorstep, Charity.
Well, we've been eating it. So, and remember, for a while there, I had no oven. So I was cooking it in a toaster oven at one point.
Oh my goodness.
Very
That's
small
resilience.
loaves.
That's resilience.
So there was, well, this is kind of a comment, but I love it. This is from Ellen Schneppel, who is actually also a culinary historian of New York. So Ellen, you want to unmute and tell us this great thing about leftovers?
Okay, can you hear me now? Okay. Anyway, you, Jackie and Karen, you wanted another word for leftovers, and in Trinidad, in the West Indies or Caribbean, they're called bring-ups. But the thing is, it's actually a positive expression. It's not the fact that you don't like the food and something happens. So anyway, I thought that was a sweet term.
Bring ups.
Thank you for that.
I love that. Yeah. Kate Lewis, you also had a comment on leftovers, which was sort of a question. Do you want to pose that? I don't know if Kate is still on the call.
Here, Kate.
Maybe not.
Kate works for the U.S. Department of Agriculture.
So, well, she was saying that she was saying that it's interesting about this thing about the negative connotation of leftovers. So, for her growing up, leftovers did not have a negative connotation, but it seems like that's something that's happened maybe more recently. Where do you think? Is there a negative connotation in some people's minds? And if so, where do you think that comes from?
Well, I'll just jump in here. Raising my 3 sons, whenever I would cook or serve them leftovers, they all would moan and groan and say, "Oh, Mom, not leftovers again." So,
there's kind of a history of leftovers. The word leftovers and some history has been written. I'm hoping to expand upon that in the book. But in the old days, food was just carried over. They were called carryovers, and they were rolled over from meal to meal. So like we're talking about, the colonial eras and things. So you might have a salt cod for dinner on Saturday night, and then that would become a fish balls for breakfast the next morning. So it didn't have to be just dinner to dinner or lunch to lunch or what have you. But what had happened was in the 50s, when industrialized food came in, there was a lot of food advertising, and they wanted you to keep buying new food. And so there was a lot of advertising against leftovers and, trying to elevate cooking.
Oh, that's interesting.
Buying, cooking new foods. And also, I know, like when I asked a colleague of mine what they do in India for leftovers, she said, "We have no leftovers. We have no refrigeration." So what happens is the help, like in the caste system, takes whatever extra food is left from the table and it takes it home. And I learned that that's what happened in medieval times too, is the beggars would come to the door and they would take your leftovers. So in the days before refrigeration, you gave the food away to somebody, rolling down the society,
Food
social
chain.
food chain. Yeah. But there are people who just refuse leftovers. But in defense of leftovers, the better the food, the better the leftovers. So if it's something starts wonderful, it's going to probably taste better the next day.
That is true.
So
All
I
right.
don't know what Karen was serving those 3 boys, but if it was good the first time, they might have eaten it the next night too.
Let's see. There's another comment, an interesting one from Margarita Tortora about Italian bread. Margarita, do you want to tell us about your Italian bread?
Well, I was just saying that during the pandemic, I'm here in New Haven, in Connecticut, and we have great Italian bakeries, and
Yes,
we're
you
known
do.
for our pizza here. And so it's very easy for me to go and buy bread, which I always did. But during the pandemic, it was closed. So I started baking my own bread. And now I still do, even though they're still selling bread now, because I learned how to make it, and I really like the homemade bread. And so
That's great.
something I probably would have never learned to do if not for the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm all for leftovers. Jackie knows me a long time, but in Italian cooking, I'm Italian, of course, and we always have leftovers. And usually you fight for the leftovers the next day because they taste better. Like if you have gnocchi the first day and then you warm up the gnocchi in the pan with a little olive oil and peperoncino the next day, they're so much better.
Hi, Muggs. Thanks for joining tonight. Now, aren't there dishes in Italian cuisine, like French cuisine with French onion soup and things where you use the leftover bread, like ribollita?
Ribollita, yeah.
Yeah,
All the
that's
time. And even a frittata. Oftentimes you have the frittata with some leftover veggies that you've had, or even with pasta. You could make an egg frittata with leftover pasta. Yeah. Yeah.
Sure.
There's lots of things, but
Yeah, the egg is universal across so many different cultures, whether it's omelets or frittata or other kinds of dishes. Eggs are a perfect carrier for a leftover anything. So is rice. So is rice. And of course, soups and stews.
and the soups taste so much better the next day.
Yeah.
The flavors seep in.
They merge. Yeah. Let's see, Ellen had another question. I don't know, Ellen, if you wanna ask this yourself. It has to do with reciprocity. Yeah, okay. Basically it has to do with giving, cooking and giving food to other people. And she's just wondering if on Shelter Island, if that was something that was happening. And it certainly it was. I mean, there were a number of examples of people sharing food with neighbors. Actually, Rachel's mom, I think, is one of them, who was cooking and sharing with a neighbor. And Linda Zavato and her cookies. I think there is a guy who makes sourdough bread on the island and sells it. Are you aware of any other sort of sharing sort of? Well, we of course provide food for seniors through the senior center. That's a well-organized, longstanding that predates the pandemic. I don't know. Can you think of any other?
A couple of times, Charity, some of my older sort of friends that live alone and don't drive at night, we took some food or, a platter of something over to them.
It would be fun to figure out what was going on informally on the island, because I would suspect there was a lot of it.
There's a lot of food sharing on this island. Yeah, there's a lot of food sharing. I mean, I bet most of it is happening more or less neighbor to neighbor. I mean, certainly in our neighborhood, that's been going on. But yeah, that would be an interesting thing to study, actually.
Right.
Thank you, Ellen, for that question.
Yeah, I know here in New York, they started some community refrigerators. Now, community refrigerators are kind of like all over Germany, but it was really nice to see them popping up on the sidewalks of New York with food in them that anyone could put in and anyone could take out.
Mhm.
So that's another thing that I really hope sticks around after the pandemic is community refrigerators, like we're starting to see these pop-up libraries and community pantries, things like this, just to share food informally with neighbors.
Yeah, of course, we have a venison program here. There's a refrigerator at the recycling center that has venison.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
That's a community action, and it's free. You just have to get on an email list, so they'll let you know when there's some there to pick up.
I didn't know that. Terrific.
Yeah.
Terrific. Yeah.
All right. Well, this was great. Thank you so much, you guys. This was a really fascinating discussion. I want to bounce this back to Nanette because she has some closing thoughts, I think, right? Nanette, yes, there you are. Okay.
Okay. Well, first off, thank you so much. I mean, this was just a marvelous discussion and presentation, and I'm so appreciative that you brought so much of the community into your discussion and referenced IGA and Commander Cody and neighbors, and you really recapped what went on here on Shelter Island, and it truly is a marvelous gift for the archives for the future. So I really just wanted to say thank you very, very much for doing not only the book, but having this discussion with all of us. Well, part of my job as director here is to do the sales pitch. So connecting from a quarantine kitchen is available in Haven Store, which is open Wednesday through Saturday, 10 to 2, and also open 24/7 online on our website, which is on the screen here now. It's shelterislandhistorical.org. I encourage you all to please contact us, send us your stories. This is so important that we have documentation of what has taken place and what's continuing to take place and possibly continue for a while. We don't know. So please, please help us to capture this time period for future generations. But I'd like to thank everybody who's participated tonight, and I'm hungry.
Me too.
Well, thank you, everybody, for joining from all over the country. And thank you so much, Charity, for all your work.
Oh, my pleasure. It was fun. Thank you.
Job.
Thank you.
Okay.
Charity, could you have Jackie show a picture of her book?
Jackie, can you hold your book
Sure.
up?
Here it is.
I have it.
Yeah.
Here's Connecting from a Quarantine Kitchen. Yeah. And that is the view from Karen's deck.
Oh, that's beautiful.
And so, and we've been tracking that through the seasons as well. It's just a gorgeous view of Gardner's Bay on the north of Shelter Island.
Actually, is that the view north? Because one thing that's very interesting about that view, I don't know if you thought about this when you took the picture, but I believe that is where the British stored, and I think that was originally a hay field before the land subsided. So during the occupation, the British were actually making hay and storing hay there. It's a kind of important historical site.
That's why they call it Hay Beach.
That's why it's called
where
Hay
Karen
Beach.
lives, in Hay Beach.
Yes.
Oh, fun. Oh,
Yeah. So it's where
you.
it's where, yeah. So it's a link to the past, right off your balcony.
Right there, Hay Beach. It's Hay Beach. I love it. I didn't know that.
Thank you, Charity.
Thank you.